The psychology of people who don't post on social media.
There is a certain type of person you rarely notice on social media, even though you probably know several of them in real life. Their profile exists somewhere in the background, often with an old photo, maybe a few posts from years ago, and almost no activity. They scroll, they read, they see everything, yet they almost never share anything themselves.
At first glance, it might seem like they simply do not care about social media, although the reality tends to be far more interesting. Many of these people are actually very aware of what is happening online. They know who got married, who moved to another city, who started a new business, and who suddenly became obsessed with morning routines. They are not disconnected. They are observant. Researchers often call these users lurkers, which sounds negative at first, although it simply refers to people who consume content without actively posting. Studies suggest that this group is not small. In fact, research from Northeastern University found that as many as 90% of social media users mainly observe rather than post, meaning the majority of people online are actually silent participants. This completely changes how we think about social media. The loudest voices appear to dominate the space, although most people are quietly watching from the sidelines. And once you start noticing this group, something interesting becomes clear. People who rarely post often share certain psychological traits, and many of these traits reveal a deeper relationship with attention, privacy, and social interaction. 1. They don't feel the same need for external validation. One of the most consistent patterns among people who rarely post is a reduced dependence on external validation. Social media platforms are designed around feedback systems. Likes, comments, shares, and followers create a loop where people receive immediate reactions to what they share. Over time, this can subtly influence behavior. Some people become more motivated to post when they receive attention. Others begin to shape their content based on what performs well. Eventually, posting becomes less about sharing life and more about managing impressions. People who rarely post often step away from this loop. They still experience achievements, interesting moments, and personal milestones, although they feel less urgency to broadcast them. Psychologists sometimes connect this to intrinsic motivation. When someone is internally motivated, they tend to value experiences for personal meaning rather than external recognition. This means a vacation remains meaningful even without photos. A personal achievement still feels satisfying without public acknowledgement. This does not necessarily mean they dislike attention. Most people enjoy positive reactions. The difference lies in whether attention becomes necessary for satisfaction. Many people who rarely post simply do not feel that need. There is also something quietly interesting about how this appears in everyday life. Someone might travel to a beautiful place, spend time exploring, enjoy the moment, and then return home without sharing anything. Meanwhile, others may spend part of that same experience thinking about angles, captions, and how the post will look. Neither approach is wrong. They simply reflect different psychological preferences. And over time, people who rarely post often become more comfortable with experiences that exist privately rather than publicly. 2. They often value privacy more than visibility. Privacy has become increasingly rare in a world where sharing is encouraged everywhere. Platforms reward visibility, and algorithms promote content that generates interaction. This creates subtle pressure to share more. People who rarely post often resist this pressure. They prefer to keep parts of their lives offline, sometimes because they value boundaries. sometimes because they simply enjoy having a space that belongs only to them. Interestingly, psychologists suggest that this preference is often linked to autonomy. People who value autonomy tend to make decisions based on personal values rather than social expectations. Research shows that individuals who avoid frequent posting often prioritize control over personal information and prefer to maintain separation between public and private life. This becomes even more noticeable in certain situations. Some people avoid posting about relationships, family, or major life changes. Others prefer not to share location details, daily routines, or personal milestones. For them, privacy is not secrecy. It is simply a way to maintain control over personal space. There is also a practical side to this mindset. Some people become more aware of how information spreads online. Once something is posted, it can be copied, shared, or stored indefinitely. This awareness often leads to more cautious behavior. And this cautious approach often creates a calmer relationship with social media. 3. They tend to observe more than they express. People who rarely post often develop strong observational habits. Instead of focusing on how they appear, they spend more time noticing patterns, behaviors, and interactions. This can lead to a deeper understanding of social dynamics. They may notice how certain posts attract attention, how trends spread, or how people present different versions of themselves online. Interestingly, research suggests that silent users often consume more content than active posters. They know what is happening, even if they rarely interact publicly. This creates a unique perspective. They see trends forming before they become obvious. They notice how people change over time. They recognize patterns that others might overlook. Over time, this observational mindset can extend beyond social media. Many people who rarely post become skilled at reading social situations in real life as well. They notice tone, body language, and subtle emotional cues. They may appear quiet, although their minds are actively processing information. This is one reason why people who rarely post are often described as thoughtful or perceptive. 4. They often prefer real-life connection over online interaction. Another interesting pattern appears in how people who rarely post build relationships. Instead of focusing on broad visibility, they often prioritize smaller, more meaningful connections. Psychological research suggests that some individuals intuitively understand the difference between attention and connection. Receiving hundreds of likes can create a feeling of visibility, although it does not necessarily create meaningful relationships. People who rarely post often prefer conversations, shared experiences, and personal interactions over public updates. This does not mean they avoid social interaction. Many of them maintain close friendships, strong relationships, and active social lives. The difference lies in how these interactions happen. They may prefer phone calls instead of posts, private messages instead of public comments, small gatherings instead of large online audiences. This approach often leads to deeper connections, even if their online presence appears quiet. And this is where the psychology becomes even more interesting. Because people who rarely post are not simply avoiding social media. Many of them are making a quiet psychological choice. A choice that shapes how they experience attention, relationships, and identity in a world that constantly encourages visibility. The quietest profiles often belong to some of the most thoughtful people. And in the next section, we're going to explore another fascinating pattern. Why people who rarely post often think differently about life itself. As the picture becomes clearer, one detail starts to stand out. People who rarely post are not simply passive users of social media. Their silence often reflects a different way of processing life itself. While many users treat social platforms as a place to document experiences in real time, others seem to separate experience from documentation entirely. For them, an event is complete the moment it is lived. There is no internal pressure to translate it into content. This difference in mindset is subtle, although it has noticeable psychological consequences. 5. They separate experience from performance. Modern digital culture often encourages a quiet transformation in behavior. Moments that used to exist privately now often carry an additional layer of awareness. How it will look online. A dinner, a trip, a celebration, even a simple walk through the city can become something that is mentally framed as potential content. People who rarely post tend to resist this mental shift. When they experience something, their attention stays inside the moment rather than stepping outside to observe it as content. A concert remains a concert. A conversation remains a conversation. A sunset is not filtered through the question of how it would appear in a post. Psychologists studying attention and cognition often describe this as reduced self-monitoring in social presentation contexts. In simpler terms, their mind is not constantly switching into observer mode to evaluate how their life might be perceived by others. This creates a different kind of mental experience. Moments feel less fragmented. Attention is less divided. Experiences tend to stay intact instead of being partially shaped for external consumption. And this may explain why many people who rarely post describe their offline life as more grounded or more present. 6. They are less influenced by social comparison loops. One of the most studied psychological effects of social media is comparison. People naturally compare their lives to others, although platforms amplify this tendency by showing curated highlights of success, beauty, travel, and achievement. Over time, this can create a distorted perception of reality, where everyday life feels less impressive compared to what is seen online. People who rarely post are still exposed to this content. The difference lies in how deeply they engage with it. Without frequent posting, there is often less emotional investment in maintaining an online identity. This reduces the feedback loop where one person posts something, receives reactions, and then adjusts future behavior based on those reactions. Research in behavioral psychology has shown that reducing active participation in social media can decrease social comparison stress and improve subjective well-being in certain individuals, especially those already prone to overthinking or self-evaluation. Instead of measuring life through online visibility, these individuals often rely on internal benchmarks. Personal growth, private goals, and lived experience become more important than public perception. This shift is not always intentional. In many cases, it develops naturally as a side effect of not participating in the posting cycle. So, we've walked through the first 6 patterns of people who rarely post online. We've seen how they observe more than they express, how attention flows differently for them, and how they maintain a quieter, more private emotional space. These behaviors are not about being antisocial or disengaged. They reflect a completely different approach to social interaction and self-expression in the digital age. Think about it for a moment. While most of us are caught in loops of likes, notifications, and constant performance, some people step back. They choose observation over action, reflection over reaction. And in doing so, they shape their experiences in ways most of us might not even notice. Here's the thing. What we've covered so far is just the tip of the iceberg. In the next part, we'll explore the hidden advantages of this silence, the subtle ways it changes social perception, and what it might teach us about the future of human attention and connection. If you've been enjoying this exploration of human behavior, you might want to hit that subscribe button now, not just to see the next part, but to dive deeper into the hidden layers of everyday psychology that most people completely overlook. And before we move on to part 2, take a moment to notice your own relationship with social media. Are you posting, observing, or somewhere in between? Think about it, because understanding this is the first step to seeing your own habits with fresh eyes. Stick around. The next chapter is where the real surprises start.